The gunshot cracked through the evening air like thunder, jolting Lillian Emerson awake from her makeshift bed of hay in the abandoned barn. For 3 days, she had been surviving on nothing but a handful of wild berries and whatever rainwater she could collect in her dented tin cup. At 18, life had already dealt her more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Montana Territory, 1876. Spring was supposed to bring renewal, but for Lillian, it only brought hunger pangs that twisted her empty stomach like a knife. Since the orphanage had burned down in Helena 2 weeks prior, she'd been wandering westward, hoping to find work in one of the growing frontier towns. Lillian gathered her meager possessions: a tattered dress, a small leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her mother, and the tin cup into her worn canvas sack. The distant voices of men approaching the barn sent her heart racing. She needed to move on before daybreak. The Montana wilderness in May was beautiful but unforgiving. Pink and gold streaked the sky as Lillian trudged along the muddy trail, her boots too large and worn through at the soles, creating blisters that made each step agony. By midday, the small settlement of Silver Creek came into view, its wooden buildings and dirt roads a welcome sight after days of isolation. Her stomach growled fiercely as she passed the general store, the smell of fresh bread wafting through its open door nearly bringing her to tears. 2 women in fine dresses eyed her suspiciously as she walked by, whispering behind gloved hands. Lillian knew what they saw: a rail, thin girl in a filthy dress, her auburn hair matted and tangled, her face smudged with dirt. "Excuse me." She approached a man loading supplies onto a wagon. "Is there any work available in town?" The man barely glanced at her. "Nothing for your kind. Move along." Lillian swallowed her pride and continued down the main street, asking at every establishment: the saloon, the hotel, even the livery stable. Each time she was turned away with suspicious looks or outright disgust. By late afternoon, desperation had set in. She hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days, and the dizziness was becoming harder to ignore. The last building on the edge of town was a modest ranch house with a large barn and corral behind it. A sign reading Vance Ranch hung above the gate. She hesitated at the fence, watching as a tall man with broad shoulders worked with a chestnut mare in the corral. He moved with confident grace, speaking in low, soothing tones to the horse as he guided it around in a circle. Gathering her courage, Lillian pushed open the gate and approached. "Excuse me, sir." The man turned, and Lillian found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. He pushed back his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind, though he couldn't have been more than 30. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep but gentle. "I'm looking for work, sir. Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly." The words tumbled out in a rush. The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her ragged appearance and the desperate look in her eyes. "When's the last time you ate, girl?" Lillian hesitated, pride warring with honesty. "Yesterday morning," she lied. He shook his head slowly. "No, I don't think so. Come on inside." Fear flashed through her. She'd heard stories of men who offered food to desperate girls, only to demand payment in ways that made her skin crawl. But something in his eyes, a kindness, perhaps made her follow him toward the house. "I'm Wade Vance," he said over his shoulder. "This is my ranch." "Lillian Emerson," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The inside of the ranch house was simple but comfortable. A large wooden table dominated the kitchen, and a stone fireplace warmed the adjoining sitting room. Wade gestured for her to sit at the table as he moved to the stove, where a pot of stew simmered. "Eat first, then we'll talk," he said, placing a bowl of steaming stew and a chunk of bread before her. Lillian wanted to show restraint, to eat slowly and prove she had manners, but the moment the rich, savory scent hit her nostrils, all pretense vanished. She devoured the food like a starved animal, tears streaming down her face at the overwhelming relief of a full stomach. Wade sat across from her, silent and watchful, refilling her bowl when she finished without comment. Only when she'd eaten her fill and the desperate edge had left her eyes did he speak again. "Now, Miss Emerson, tell me your story, the truth, if you please." Lillian wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, embarrassed by her earlier ferocity. "I was at Mercy Home for Children in Helena. It burned down 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to find work since then, but no one will hire a girl with no references. Your parents, dead. Fever took them both when I was 8, Wade nodded slowly. And what brings you all the way to Silver Creek? I heard there were opportunities in the western settlements, places where people don't ask too many questions about where you came from. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's true enough. But Silver Creek isn't as welcoming as some. People here are suspicious of strangers. I've noticed, Lillian said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Wade leaned back in his chair, considering her. I could use help around the ranch. My wife died 3 years ago and I've been raising my son alone. He's 5 now and a handful. The house needs tending and I can't be inside and out with the stock at the same time. Hope flickered in Lillian's chest, but she tamped it down, having learned long ago that hope often led to disappointment. What would the work involve? Cooking, cleaning, helping with my boy Thomas. Some gardening come summer, room and board plus $10 a month. It was more than fair generous even, but suspicion nagged at her. Why would you offer me this? You don't know me. Wade's eyes darkened slightly. My Catherine came west as an orphan too. Got off the orphan train in Bozeman with nothing but the clothes on her back. I know what it's like to have the world turn its back on you. He paused. Besides, I've got good instincts about people. You've got honest eyes. Lillian felt heat rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. Thank you, Mr. Vance, I accept your offer. Wade, he corrected. Mr. Vance was my father. That evening, Lillian met Thomas, a whirlwind of energy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of blonde hair. The boy regarded her with open curiosity but no fear, bombarding her with questions about where she came from and if she knew how to make apple pie. Wade had prepared a small bedroom for her off, the kitchen clearly once used for storage but hastily cleared and fitted with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small chest of drawers. It was the first private space Lillian had ever called her own, and she sat on the edge of the bed that night, running her hands over the clean quilt in wonder. The first weeks at Vance Ranch settled into a rhythm. Lillian rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, learned to manage the temperamental wood stove, and discovered that Thomas would eat vegetables if she hid them in stew. Wade worked from sunrise to sunset, tending cattle, mending fences, and training horses, a skill for which he was becoming known throughout the territory. He was unfailingly polite to Lillian but maintained a certain distance. She would catch him watching her sometimes with an unreadable expression, only to quickly look away when their eyes met. It was clear he was still mourning his wife, keeping her memory alive through stories he told Thomas each night before bed. As spring gave way to summer, Lillian's hollow cheeks filled out and her hands grew calloused from honest work. She planted a vegetable garden behind the house, mended Wade's shirts with tiny, even stitches, and taught Thomas his letters at the kitchen table. The townsfolk still regarded her with suspicion when she went to the general store for supplies, but she found she cared less about their judgment with each passing day. One evening in late July, as Lillian was hanging laundry in the yard, Wade returned from town earlier than expected, his expression grim. Everything all right? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Ran into trouble in town. The Blackwood gang's been spotted near Silver Creek. They've hit 3 ranches in the last month. He lowered his voice, glancing toward the house where Thomas was napping. I want you to learn to shoot. Lillian's hands stilled on the damp shirt she was hanging. I've never touched a gun. Then it's time you learned. Out here, it's not just wolves and bears that pose a danger. The next morning, Wade set up empty bottles on the fence line behind the barn and handed Lillian a revolver. It felt impossibly heavy in her hands, and her first shots went wild, the recoil jarring her arms. But Wade was a patient teacher, standing close behind her to adjust her stance, his breath warm against her ear as he explained how to sight down the barrel. By the end of the week, she could hit 5 bottles out of 6, and something had shifted between them. The careful distance Wade had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a growing ease in each other's company. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, they would sit on the porch, watching the stars emerge while Wade told stories of his early days in Montana, and Lillian shared rare happy memories from her childhood. August brought a heat wave that turned the grass brown and made the air shimmer above the distant mountains. Wade and his ranch hands worked tirelessly to keep the cattle watered, often returning to the house long after dark, exhausted and sun-burned. One such evening, as Lillian was placing a cool compress on Wade's blistered neck, Thomas asked innocently, "Miss Lillian, are you going to be my new mama?" The question hung in the air between them. Wade's eyes met Lillian's, something unspoken passing between them before he gently told his son, "That's not a question for right now, Thomas." That night, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, Lillian slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The vast Montana sky stretched above her, stars scattered like diamond dust across the blackness. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear Wade approach until he sat beside her. "I'm sorry about Thomas's question," he said quietly. "Kids don't understand complications." "It's all right," Lillian replied, keeping her eyes on the stars. "He misses his mother, he does." Wade was silent for a long moment before adding, "But that's not why he asked." Lillian turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. "What do you mean?" "He sees what I've been trying not to see, that you've become more than just help around the ranch." Wade's voice was low, uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. "I didn't intend for this to happen, Lillian." "Neither did I," she whispered, the truth of it settling into her bones. Wade reached out slowly, as if afraid she might pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I thought that part of my life was over when Catherine died. I never expected to feel this way again." Before Lillian could respond, a horse's whinny from the corral broke the moment. Wade stood abruptly, listening. "That's odd. Shadow doesn't usually fuss at night." Then came the sound that had awakened Lillian on her first night in the area, a gunshot, followed by a man's shout. "Get inside," Wade ordered, his voice suddenly hard. "Get Thomas and hide in the root cellar. Now." Lillian didn't question him. She ran inside, heart pounding as she scooped a sleeping Thomas from his bed and hurried to the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. The boy stirred, confused and frightened as she carried him down the narrow steps into the earthy darkness. "SHH, sweetheart," she soothed, cradling him close. "We're playing a hiding game with your pa. We need to be very quiet." Above them, the sounds of struggle reached their ears, men's voices, another gunshot, the crash of breaking glass. Thomas began to cry silently against her shoulder, and Lillian fought her own rising panic, remembering the revolver Wade had insisted she keep in her apron pocket. She drew it out now, hands shaking but grip firm as Wade had taught her. The minutes stretched endlessly. Then footsteps crossed the kitchen floor above them and the trapdoor was flung open. Lillian raised the gun, finger on the trigger. Wade's face appeared in the opening. "It's all right. They're gone." Relief flooded through her as she lowered the weapon. She carried Thomas up the stairs, the boy immediately reaching for his father, who gathered him close despite the blood staining his shirt. "You're hurt," Lillian gasped, noticing the gash across Wade's forehead and the way he favored his left arm. "It's not deep." Blackwood and his men were after the horses. They didn't expect resistance. A grim smile touched his lips. "Got one of them in the leg. They won't be back tonight, but they'll try again." Lillian set water to boil and gathered clean rags while Wade settled Thomas back to sleep with promises that the bad men were gone. When he returned to the kitchen, she gently cleaned the cut on his forehead, her hands steady despite the fear still coursing through her. "You could have been killed," she said softly. "They won't take what's mine without a fight." His eyes held hers. "Not my horses, not my ranch, and not my family." The word family hung between them, heavy with meaning, Lillian's hands stilled against his skin. "Is that what we are?" she asked, barely breathing. Wade reached up to capture her hand in his. "It's what I want us to be if you'll have me." The weeks following the Blackwood gang's attack brought change to Silver Creek. The sheriff organized a volunteer patrol, and neighboring ranchers banded together for protection. The gang was eventually cornered and captured near the Idaho border, bringing a sense of security back to the valley. But the most significant changes happened at Vance Ranch. Lillian's status shifted from hired help to something more, though neither she nor Wade put a name to it at first. They circled each other cautiously, learning the contours of their changing relationship through small gestures, his hand lingering on her shoulder as she cooked, her fingers brushing his as she passed him coffee in the morning. Thomas, with a child's intuition, seemed to understand the transformation before they did. He began calling Lillian Lily instead of Miss Lillian, claiming it was easier to say, and took to following her around the garden, peppering her with questions about plants and insects with an intensity that made Wade chuckle. "He's never taken to anyone like he has to you," he told her one evening as they watched Thomas chase fireflies in the yard. "Catherine would be glad." The mention of his late wife no longer created an uncomfortable silence between them. Instead, Lillian found herself asking questions about Catherine, what she had loved, how she had laughed wanting to honor the woman who had been Thomas's mother and Wade's first love. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Wade took Lillian into town for the Harvest Festival. It was her first social outing in Silver Creek, and she was nervous about the reception she would receive. She wore her best dress, one Wade had insisted on buying for her from the dressmaker in town, and pinned her hair up in a style she remembered her mother wearing in a faded photograph. "You look beautiful," Wade said simply when she emerged from her room, his eyes warm with admiration. The town square had been transformed for the festival, with tables laden with food, fiddle music filling the air, and lanterns strung between buildings. To Lillian's surprise, several women who had previously snubbed her now approached with cautious smiles, offering compliments on her dress and inquiring about life at the ranch. "Word gets around," Wade explained when she expressed her confusion. "They know you stood your ground during the Blackwood trouble. That counts for something out here." Later, as twilight deepened and couples began to dance beneath the lanterns, Wade held out his hand to her. "May I have this dance, Miss Emerson?" "I don't know how," she admitted, embarrassed. "Neither do I," he confessed with a grin. "But I reckon we can figure it out together." They swayed awkwardly at first, finding their rhythm as the fiddle played a slow, sweet melody. Lillian was acutely aware of Wade's hand at her waist, the solid warmth of his chest near hers, and the eyes of the townspeople upon them. But as the music continued, the world beyond their small circle seemed to fade away. "I've been thinking," Wade said quietly, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "Thomas needs a mother and I need a wife." Lillian's steps faltered. "Wade, let me finish," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking out of necessity or convenience. I'm asking because I love you, Lillian Emerson. I think I have since the day you walked onto my ranch, proud and starving and brave as hell." Tears pricked at her eyes. "I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No family, no dowry. You have everything I need," he interrupted. "Courage, kindness, and a heart big enough to love a broken widower and his son as if they were your own." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I do love you, both of you. I never thought I'd have a family of my own." Wade stopped dancing and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Say yes, and you'll never be without family again." "Yes," she whispered, the word carrying all the hope she'd never dared to feel. Yes, they were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the edge of town. Thomas served as ring-bearer, solemnly carrying the simple gold band on a small pillow Wade had fashioned from one of Catherine's handkerchiefs, a gesture that brought tears to Lillian's eyes. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with several ranch hands and a surprising number of townspeople in attendance. Lillian wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar, and Wade cleaned up impressively in a new shirt and his least-worn boots. That night, after Thomas had been tucked into bed with stories and promises of pancakes in the morning, Wade led Lillian to the master bedroom, a room she had cleaned but never slept in. He had cleared away some of Catherine's belongings, making space for Lillian's few possessions, but photographs remained on the dresser, a visual reminder that their life together would always honor what came before. "Are you nervous?" Wade asked, lighting the lamp beside the bed. "A little," Lillian admitted. The orphanage had taught her the biological facts of marriage, but nothing of tenderness or desire. Wade took her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world, Lily. Nothing needs to happen tonight that you're not ready for." But as he kissed her, gently at first and then with growing passion, Lillian found herself responding with an intensity that surprised them both. Years of loneliness melted away beneath his touch, replaced by a sense of belonging so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Later, as they lay tangled in the quilts, Wade's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Lillian marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a starving orphan to a wife and mother in the span of 6 months, it seemed impossible, yet undeniably real. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how close I came to walking past your ranch that day if I'd given up one stop sooner." "But you didn't," he said simply. "Some things are meant to be, Lily. I believe that now." The years that followed brought changes to Vance Ranch. Wade's reputation as a horse trainer grew, bringing buyers from as far away as California. The original house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, first with the arrival of Emma Catherine Vance in the spring of 1878, and then William James Vance 2 years later. Thomas took to his role as big brother with enthusiasm, teaching the little ones to ride almost as soon as they could walk. He had Wade's natural gift with horses and Lillian's quiet determination, a combination that would eventually make him Wade's partner in the ranch operations. Lillian's vegetable garden expanded into a proper farm that supplied not only their family, but also brought in additional income at the Silver Creek market. She became known for her preserves and her willingness to share knowledge with newcomers to the territory. The suspicious glances that had once followed her through town were replaced by respectful nods and friendly conversations. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Wade presented Lillian with a gift that left her speechless: the deed to the ranch, with both their names listed as owners. "This is your home as much as mine now," he said as they sat on the porch swing, watching their children play in the yard. "I want it to be official." Lillian traced their names on the paper, remembering the desperate, hungry girl who had begged for work at this very ranch. "I never dreamed of having so much," she said softly. "Neither did I after Catherine died. I thought that chapter of my life was closed forever." Wade put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "But you taught me that there are second chances in this world, if you're brave enough to take them." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Lillian leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected place. From orphan to wife to mother, her journey had been unlikely but perfect in its own way, proof that even in the wild unpredictability of the frontier, love could take root and flourish against all odds. And when Thomas called from the yard, his siblings trailing behind him like ducklings, Lillian and Wade rose together to meet them, hand in hand, ready for whatever adventure came next together.